Welcome back to CBSN, and we are updating the story that we were following for you today. A big development. Police have now identified the suspect in that mass shooting in Charleston at the Emmanuel AME Church. They say it is Dylann Storm Roof, a 21-year-old who was previously arrested on trespass, a mugshot already in the system. They say he went into the church last night, sat in a Bible study for an hour, and then opened fire, killing 9 people. With us now is the former governor of South Carolina and now Representative Mark Sanford, who joins us from the Russell Rotunda on Capitol Hill. Representative, it's good of you to give us a few minutes of a day. I'm sure this is such a sad day for you. What's your reaction on this news?
It's one of shock and horror and disappointment. You know, the office has been flooded with calls since early this morning. People touching base with me from back home saying, hey, did you hear the news? Did you hear the news? And what I hear universally across the different emails, texts, and phone calls is again the same. Real shock, real disappointment, and a real sense of how in the world could this have happened.
Congressman, what is your message to the community, to the people of Charleston, and to South Carolinians?
Well, I mean, I think it's one of resolve. I think first things first, people want to apprehend this young man who inexplicably went on this shooting rampage. I think beyond that, we're going to go through a healing process as a community. You know, you can only imagine being a parishioner at this church. You can only imagine being a family member. And so there's a lot of healing to be done. But the first thing that I think people are focused on back home, whether it's the mayor in Charleston, whether it's, you know, the chief of police, Chief Mullen, or others involved in the law enforcement effort, is to catch this guy.
I know, Congressman, that you spent a fair amount of time in Columbia when you were governor there and driving back and forth to the Charleston area. We've learned that Dylann Storm Roof, the suspect, is from the Columbia area, so it was a bit of a hike, I understand, to Charleston. Can you describe the distance there and how closely tied are those two cities in your state?
They're not really that much tied at all. Politics obviously ties it in that it's our state capital, so people make it a point to drive from Columbia or other parts of the state into Columbia in a political sense. But they're very different communities. Charleston's on the coast, it's a port city, it's tied to tourism. Columbia really is a government city, and obviously Fort Jackson's a military presence, manufacturing. But there's not a lot of connect, so it's a 100-mile drive. It's not something you would do flippantly or casually. It would be, I mean, premeditated. You would plan to take a trip from Charleston to Columbia or vice versa.
Congressman, we have been talking all morning long about this suspect who sat in this Bible study class for an hour and perhaps now may not even be from the area. Talk to us a little bit about the community in the sense that they welcomed perhaps and accepted this stranger into a house of worship, and then the devastating results after he'd spent an hour with these folks praying.
I think it says everything in the world about Emmanuel AME Church there on Calhoun Street in Charleston. The fact that it's a historically black church, that they would say welcome to a young white kid who they don't know, or I would presuppose that they don't know, and invite him in. I think it says a lot about, again, the makeup of the congregation. It also says a lot about the pastor. He was a state senator for 8 years while I was governor, and you talk about a guy who walked his faith. This guy really walked his faith. So I think it says a lot about the church. I think it says a lot about the pastor that they would welcome in a stranger that, unfortunately, in this case, was a crazy man who went on this shooting rampage and killed most of them.
Can you talk a little bit about Clementa Pinckney, what his loss as a state senator and as a community leader in Charleston, what it will mean for the state of South Carolina?
If I'm not mistaken, he was like the youngest African-American state senator elected to the General Assembly of South Carolina, which says a lot about him. He represented what's considered to be the historic low country of South Carolina: Carlton, Jasper, a piece of Beaufort County, Hampton County, a little area a little bit south of Charleston, sort of between Charleston and Savannah. And he was a real leader in the community. I mean, he had this amazing sense of gravitas about him. I think his faith, the Bible says, let your light so shine before men. Believe me, this guy's light shined in the way that he conducted himself, the way he handled himself, the way he was ultimately asked to be the pastor at this, again, historically very significant church in Charleston.
Congressman, we're just showing an image to our viewers now of his seat at the state capitol there, and it is draped in a black cloth. That is the seat of Clemente Pinckney, as you point out, a member of the state Senate there in South Carolina. We also have a statement, sir, from Lindsey Graham, and he says, "We are all heartbroken by this tragedy." And he goes on to say, "I pray that God will provide you healing in the coming days." How does South Carolina and Charleston begin to heal, sir?
I think that's all that one can do. I mean, again, this church was a pillar of the faith community in Charleston, and, you know, I think that they're going to join together and the faith is going to sustain them. I think there's going to be a lot of prayer offered by people, black, white, and of all different races in the Charleston community. It's a diverse population that we have down in the Low Country. I think you're going to see people of all faiths, all walks of life, coming together and offering prayers for those families directly affected, and for this larger notion of healing that has to take place in any community in the aftermath of an event like this.
You know, that's a conversation that we've been talking an awful lot about in recent months nationally because of the multiple shootings nationwide of unarmed black men, and it happened right there in North Charleston where a police officer shot and killed a man who was running away from a police officer. There are a lot of questions at that time about race relations in South Carolina, how far they've come, how far they need to go. What would be your assessment?
My assessment would be you can't judge a community by one bad actor in the community or two bad actors in the community. You know, I'd mentioned somewhere earlier this morning that part of the tragedy of South Carolina's history is that we were a slave state, as were the other colonies at the start of this country. But that's history, and there's been a lot of growth since then by leaders in both the black and the white communities in saying, how do we build bonds and bridges together? One of the first calls I made this morning was to Lonnie Randolph, who's head of the NAACP in South Carolina, and a dear friend who I've gotten to know prior to the governorship, during the governorship, and absolutely stayed in touch with him since then. So I think that a lot of people have been at work at this. There's obviously continued work to be done in any community.
Representative Mark Sanford, thank you so much, sir, for joining us on a terrible and tragic day. We really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We're going to stay on top of this story. Again, we have all the latest developments, all the breaking news. Stay right here with CBSN. We'll have more.